The explosion in the kitchen wasn't exactly how Emma Simmons had planned to start the biggest catering job of her career. A plume of smoke rose from what was supposed to be a delicate raspberry soufflé, and her sous chef Marco was frantically waving a kitchen towel at the smoke detector. 30 minutes until guests arrive, Emma muttered, checking her watch. Marco, can you salvage those appetizers? Jenna, get started on the backup dessert plan, the chocolate mousse towers. We're not going down like this. At 28, Emma had built savory moments catering from nothing but determination and a second-hand food truck. Tonight's gig at the prestigious Halcyon estate was her chance to break into high society events, a birthday celebration for some anonymous wealthy client who, according to the party planner, valued discretion above all else. The client requested we remain in the kitchen, she reminded her small team as they regrouped. We serve, we smile, we don't interact with guests unless approached. This could lead to regular bookings in circles we've only dreamed about. The kitchen of the Halcyon estate was a chef's fantasy, gleaming copper pots hanging from ceiling racks, industrial-grade appliances, and marble countertops that stretched for days. Emma had been cooking since 5 a.m., preparing every element from scratch. As Emma plated the first round of appetizers, seared scallops with caviar and microgreens, the estate manager appeared in the doorway. Miss Simmons, the first guests will arrive momentarily. The host has requested that you personally deliver the first champagne toast to the guest of honor when he arrives. Emma felt her stomach knot. I thought we were strictly back of house tonight. Change of plans, the manager said with a curt nod before disappearing. Emma straightened her chef's jacket and checked her reflection in a stainless steel panel. Her dark hair was securely tucked into its bun, not a strand out of place. Professionalism was everything. 45 minutes later, a subtle change in the atmosphere alerted Emma that someone important had arrived. The party planner appeared in the kitchen doorway, gesturing urgently. He's here, she whispered. Champagne toast now. Emma grabbed the special tray they'd prepared with crystal flutes of vintage Dom Perignon, took a deep breath, and pushed through the swinging door into the main hall. The Halcyon's grand room was transformed. Soft lighting cast a warm glow over the 40 or so impeccably dressed guests, and the string quartet played something classical that Emma didn't recognize. Everyone seemed to be looking toward the entrance. That's when she saw him. Standing just inside the massive double doors was a man whose presence seemed to command the entire room without effort. Tall, with broad shoulders beneath a perfectly tailored suit, he had the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers, strong jawline, slightly tousled dark hair, and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled at an approaching guest. That's Mason Quinn, whispered the party planner beside her. You know, the birthday boy, the shipping magnate. Emma nearly dropped the tray. Everyone in the business world knew of Mason Quinn, the 34-year-old billionaire who had transformed a modest regional shipping company into a global logistics empire. His face occasionally appeared in business magazines, but he was notorious for guarding his privacy. I'm supposed to offer a toast to him, Emma whispered back, suddenly feeling underdressed in her chef's whites. Just bring the champagne to the center of the room when I signal, he'll do the rest. Emma watched as Mason Quinn moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting birthday wishes with gracious nods. Despite his obvious wealth and power, there was something unpretentious about him, the way he bent slightly to hear an elderly woman speak, the genuine laugh he shared with what appeared to be old friends rather than business associates. When the party planner raised a discreet hand, Emma straightened her shoulders and glided into the room. She moved exactly as she'd been taught during her brief stint at a fine dining restaurant in New York. Smooth, efficient, almost invisible. Except she wasn't invisible to Mason Quinn. His eyes found her immediately as she entered the circle of guests, and for a brief moment, Emma felt a strange jolt of connection. He had the most unusual eyes, a clear, intense gray that seemed almost translucent under the chandeliers. "Ah, perfect timing," he said as she approached, his voice deeper than she'd expected. Emma offered a professional smile. "Happy birthday, Mr. Quinn." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, that she knew his name. He reached for a glass from her tray and their fingers brushed momentarily. Emma felt a ridiculous flutter in her stomach. "Thank you." He paused, clearly waiting for her name. Emma Simmons. I'm the caterer," she added unnecessarily. "Emma," he repeated, as if testing how her name felt. "Thank you for making my reluctant birthday celebration considerably more bearable." Before she could respond, the party planner was at Mason's elbow, guiding him toward the center of the room for a toast. Emma retreated to the kitchen, her cheeks unaccountably warm. "He's even more handsome in person," Jenna commented when Emma returned. "Focus," Emma replied, though she couldn't help but agree. "We have 4 courses to serve perfectly. The chocolate soufflé crisis is still ongoing." The evening progressed smoothly. After that, the roasted duck with cherry reduction was a hit. The wine pairings were perfect, and even the replacement dessert earned appreciative murmurs. Emma stayed mostly in the kitchen, supervising and occasionally helping serve. It was nearly midnight when the party planner appeared again. "Mr. Quinn would like to compliment the chef," she announced, a hint of surprise in her tone. "In the library, now." Emma wiped her hands nervously on a towel. "Is everything all right with the food?" "Everything was apparently exceptional," the planner said. "He rarely asks to meet service staff. Consider it an honor." The Halcyon's library was a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive fireplace where a fire still crackled. Mason Quinn stood by a table of cognac decanters, his bow tie undone and hanging loose around his neck, making him look somehow more approachable. "Mr. Quinn? You wanted to see me," Emma said from the doorway. He turned, and that same strange connection zapped between them. "Miss Simmons." "Please come in, and it's Mason, please." Emma stepped into the room, acutely aware of her chef's jacket with a small raspberry stain on the sleeve. "I hope everything was to your satisfaction." "Beyond satisfaction," he said, gesturing to the decanters. "Cognac? I shouldn't, I'm still working." Mason smiled slightly. "I believe most of my guests have departed, and I'm technically your client. I'm giving you permission to have one drink with the birthday boy." There was something disarming about him, a hint of genuine wistfulness beneath the confident exterior that made Emma accept the crystal glass he offered. "That duck," he said appreciatively after they'd both sipped the excellent cognac. "I've had duck prepared by chefs with Michelin stars that couldn't touch what you served tonight." Emma felt a flush of professional pride. "Thank you. It's my grandmother's recipe with a few modern tweaks." "And the chocolate thing at the end, a last-minute substitution," Emma admitted. "There was a minor disaster with the planned dessert." Mason laughed, a rich, genuine sound that transformed his face. "I'd hate to see what you consider a major disaster then. It was possibly the best chocolate dessert I've ever had." They talked for nearly 30 minutes about food at first, then about Emma's journey to becoming a chef and business owner. Mason was surprisingly easy to talk to, asking thoughtful questions and listening with genuine interest. "And what about you?" Emma finally asked. "Is shipping your passion, or did you fall into it?" A shadow seemed to cross his face momentarily. "Family business. My father built Quinn Shipping from nothing. When he died unexpectedly 6 years ago, I stepped in." "I'm sorry about your father," Emma said softly. Mason nodded, studying his cognac. He would have appreciated tonight's dinner. He always said you could judge a person's character by how they prepare food for others. "And what would he have thought about me?" The question slipped out before Emma could stop herself. Mason looked up, his gray eyes holding hers with unexpected warmth. "He would have said you cook with integrity, nothing hidden, nothing false, just honest craft and care." The way he said it made it feel like the highest compliment Emma had ever received. The spell was broken when Marco appeared at the door. Sorry to interrupt, but we're packed up and ready when you are, boss. Emma nodded, setting down her barely touched cognac. Thank you for your kind words, Mr. Quinn Mason. Happy birthday. Thank you for making it memorable, Emma, he replied. For a moment, it seemed like he might say something more, but instead he simply extended his hand. When they shook hands, Emma felt that same inexplicable connection. His hand was warm and strong around hers, and he held on a beat longer than necessary. Perhaps our paths will cross again, he said. Emma smiled professionally. Perhaps. Good night. She didn't expect to see Mason Quinn again. Billionaires didn't typically frequent the circles where small catering businesses operated. So when her phone rang 3 days later with an unknown number, the last voice she expected to hear was his. Emma, it's Mason Quinn. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Emma nearly dropped the knife she was using to chop vegetables. Mr. Quinn, no, not at all. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, and it's Mason, remember? There was a smile in his voice. I'm calling because I have a proposition for you. Emma's mind raced with possibilities. Another event. A recommendation to his wealthy friends. I'm hosting a dinner at my home next week. Nothing fancy, just 8 people. Business associates from overseas. I was hoping you might be available to cater. Of course, Emma said, trying to sound professionally detached despite the flutter of excitement. I'd be happy to discuss the details. When were you thinking? Next Thursday. And? He hesitated. I was hoping you might collaborate with me on the menu. I have some ideas I'd like to run by you, perhaps over coffee tomorrow. That was how Emma found herself sitting across from Mason Quinn at a quiet corner table in an unassuming coffee shop the next morning. He arrived without fanfare, dressed in dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that matched his eyes, looking more like a university professor than a shipping tycoon. I appreciate you meeting me, he said after they'd ordered. I know it must seem strange asking to plan a menu in person. A bit unusual, Emma admitted with a smile, but I'm always happy to work closely with clients on their vision. Mason leaned forward slightly. The truth is, I wanted an excuse to see you again. Emma blinked, caught off guard by his directness. I realize that's forward, he continued, and if you're uncomfortable, we can keep this strictly professional. But I haven't been able to stop thinking about our conversation the other night. I enjoyed our conversation too, Emma admitted, her heart beating a little faster. Something in Mason's expression softened. Good. Now about this dinner, it actually is important. Japanese investors who appreciate authentic experiences. I thought perhaps a menu that tells a story about local ingredients. They spent the next hour discussing food, seasonal availability, preparation techniques, presentation ideas. The more they talked, the more Emma realized that Mason's interest in cuisine went beyond that of a casual diner. He knew about cooking methods, wine pairings, and regional specialties. You know a lot about food for someone who ships things for a living, Emma commented as they finished their second cups of coffee. Mason's smile was enigmatic. I traveled extensively after college. Food was my way of understanding different cultures. He glanced at his watch. I'm afraid I have a meeting, but I've enjoyed this tremendously. As they stood to leave, Mason hesitated. Would it be completely inappropriate if I asked you to dinner, not to discuss catering, just dinner? Emma knew she should say no. Getting personally involved with a client, especially one like Mason Quinn, was a complication her growing business didn't need. But there was something about him, a genuineness that contradicted everything she'd expected from someone of his wealth and status. Just dinner, she asked. Just dinner, he confirmed with a smile that reached his eyes. Though I can't promise I won't talk about that duck again, Emma laughed. Okay, dinner, tomorrow. I know a place where no one will recognize me, and the pasta is made by an Italian grandmother who refuses to retire. The place turned out to be a tiny restaurant in a neighborhood Emma had driven past, but never visited. The exterior was nondescript, but inside was warm and intimate, with only 8 tables and the promised Italian grandmother visible through the kitchen doorway, rolling pasta by hand. Mason arrived first and stood when Emma entered, his eyes appreciative but respectful as he took in her simple blue dress. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The dinner was magical. There was no other word for it. Conversation flowed effortlessly between them, jumping from childhood memories to favorite books to passionate debates about whether dessert was essential or optional. Emma said essential. Mason initially argued optional but conceded when the tiramisu arrived. "So why catering?" Mason asked as they lingered over espresso. "With your talent, you could have aimed for a restaurant of your own." Emma considered her answer. "Freedom, I suppose. I like creating different experiences for different occasions, and honestly, the startup costs were lower." Mason nodded thoughtfully. "Makes sense. Entrepreneurship is about finding the right entry point." "What about you?" Emma asked. "Do you enjoy what you do?" Something flickered in his eyes, a brief shadow. "Parts of it, I'm good at it, but it wasn't my choice, not initially." "What would you have chosen?" Mason was quiet for a moment. "Architecture, maybe. I've always been fascinated by how spaces affect people." He smiled ruefully. "But life had other plans." "It usually does," Emma agreed softly. When he drove her home, Mason walked her to her door like someone from another era. There was a moment of breath where Emma thought he might kiss her. Instead, he took her hand and pressed his lips gently to her knuckles. "Thank you for tonight," he said, his voice low. "I'd like to see you again if you want." Emma felt herself nodding before she could overthink it. "I'd like that." Over the next 2 weeks, they saw each other 5 times, always at out-of-the-way places where Mason wouldn't be recognized. They went to a hidden jazz club, took a private cooking class where they laughingly competed to make the better risotto. Emma won, but only barely, and spent a rainy Sunday morning at a small art gallery showing local artists. And through it all, Emma kept waiting for the moment when Mason would reveal himself to be like other wealthy men she'd encountered, entitled, condescending, or merely slumming it with someone he considered beneath his social circle. That moment never came. Instead, she discovered a man who listened intently when she spoke, who had a surprising streak of shyness beneath his confident exterior, and who seemed genuinely delighted by simple pleasures: a perfectly ripe peach at a farmer's market, the smell of old books in a used bookstore they discovered, the way rain sounded on an umbrella as they walked closely together. The dinner for his Japanese investors went perfectly. Emma and her team created a 7-course meal showcasing the best local ingredients, and she could see the appreciation in Mason's eyes as he observed his guests' reactions. After the guests departed and her staff had cleaned up, Mason found Emma in the kitchen of his surprisingly modest but elegant home. "You're extraordinary," he said simply. This time, when he stepped closer, there was no hesitation. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening as Emma responded, her hands finding their way to his chest. When they finally pulled apart, they were both slightly breathless. "I've wanted to do that since the night we met," Mason admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "What took you so long?" Emma teased. He smiled against her lips. "I didn't want you to think I was just another rich guy throwing his weight around." The next month passed in a blur of increasingly intimate dinners, long conversations that stretched into the night, and a growing awareness that what was happening between them was nothing like Emma had experienced before. Mason showed her parts of his world: a charity gala where he proudly introduced her to business associates, a weekend trip to a vineyard owned by a friend, but he seemed equally interested in her world, showing up at her small apartment with takeout when she was working late on proposals, or rolling up his sleeves to help when one of her delivery vans broke down before an event. 6 weeks after they began dating, Mason invited Emma to dinner at his home. When she arrived, she found the dining room transformed: candles everywhere, her favorite flowers in arrangements around the room, and delicious smells coming from the kitchen. "Did you cook?" Emma asked, surprised. Mason looked slightly nervous. "I tried. I've been taking lessons." The meal wasn't perfect. The salmon was slightly overdone, and the sauce had separated, but it was one of the most touching things anyone had ever done for Emma. Why am I feeling emotional about imperfect hollandaise? She laughed, blinking back unexpected tears. Mason reached across the table for her hand. Because you understand that food is never just food, it's effort and intention and care. After dinner, they moved to the comfortable sofa in his living room, the lights of the city twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. There's something I need to tell you, Mason said, his expression serious. Emma felt a flutter of anxiety. Here it comes, she thought. The complication, the revelation, the thing that would change everything. I'm not very good at relationships, he began, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. My life, my position, it complicates things. People see the money, the name, the company. They don't see me. I see you, Emma said softly. Mason's eyes, those clear gray eyes that had captivated her from the start, searched hers. You do, that's what terrifies me, because I'm falling in love with you, Emma, and I need you to know what that means. He told her then about the reality of his life, the public scrutiny, the business pressures, the expectations. How his last serious relationship had ended when he discovered the woman was more interested in his connections than in him. My life comes with complications, he finished. I want you to understand what you'd be walking into. Emma considered his words carefully. Is this your way of giving me an exit ramp? A small smile touched his lips. Maybe, is it working? Emma shook her head. No, because I'm falling in love with you too, Mason. Not your money or your name or your company. You, the relief in his expression was palpable. He pulled her closer, kissing her with an intensity that left no doubt about his feelings. I have one more confession, he murmured against her lips. HM. That disaster with your soufflé at my birthday? I saw it happen. I was walking past the kitchen when I arrived early. You handled it with such calm command that I was intrigued before I ever tasted your food. Emma laughed, resting her head against his chest. So my professional disaster is what caught your attention? No, Mason said, tilting her chin up to look into her eyes. Your grace under pressure is what caught my attention. Everything else, your talent, your passion, your kindness, that's what made me fall in love with you. Over the next year, Emma's business thrived partly due to the high-profile clients who sought her out after word spread about Mason Quinn's personal caterer, but mostly because of her undeniable talent. Mason was careful never to overshadow her success, proud to support her growing company from the sidelines. They navigated the occasional tabloid interest in their relationship with humor and privacy, creating a life together that balanced Mason's unavoidable public role with quieter moments that were just for them. On the anniversary of the night they met, Mason brought Emma back to the halcyon estate rented for the evening just for them. The same kitchen where she'd frantically salvaged desserts now held only a small table set for two by the window overlooking the gardens. No staff tonight. Emma asked as they entered. Mason smiled mysteriously. Just us. I thought I'd cook for you again. Emma raised an eyebrow. Brave. As Mason prepared a simple but elegant meal, his cooking skills had improved considerably under Emma's tutelage. They reminisced about that first night, laughing about Emma's panic over the soufflé and Mason's nervousness at approaching her in the library. I almost didn't, he admitted as he plated pasta with fresh truffles. I thought you'd think it was a cliché, the rich guy hitting on the help. I did think that briefly, Emma confessed, until you started talking about food with such genuine enthusiasm. After dinner, Mason led Emma to the grand hall where they'd first exchanged glances over champagne flutes. A single cellist played softly in the corner the same melody from that night. This feels familiar, Emma said with a smile. Mason took her hand, suddenly looking nervous in a way she hadn't seen since their early dates. I wanted to bring us back to the beginning, where everything changed for me. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, and Emma's breath caught. The moment I saw you walking across this floor, something told me my life was about to change, Mason said softly. I had no idea how much. You've shown me what it means to build something with passion and integrity. You've reminded me how to find joy in simple moments. You've loved me for exactly who I am, not what I have." He dropped to one knee, opening the box to reveal a ring with a single perfect diamond. "Emma Simmons, will you marry me?" Through tears of joy, Emma nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." As he slid the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, Emma thought about how differently this night could have gone a year ago. If the soufflé hadn't collapsed, if she hadn't been called to deliver that champagne. If Mason had been the entitled billionaire she'd feared rather than the thoughtful, complex man she'd discovered. "What are you thinking?" Mason asked, noticing her contemplative expression as they swayed slowly to the cello music. "I'm thinking about all the little moments that had to align for us to be here," Emma said. "How easily we might have missed each other." Mason's arms tightened around her. "I don't believe that. Some things are inevitable. We would have found each other somehow." As they danced in the same spot where they'd first locked eyes, Emma thought perhaps he was right. Some connections were simply meant to be as perfectly timed and precisely balanced as the best recipe, with all the right ingredients coming together to create something that would last forever. 2 years later, when they welcomed their daughter Julia into the world, Mason whispered to the tiny bundle in his arms, "You should have seen how your mother handled a dessert crisis the night we met. That's when I knew she was the one." Emma, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at her husband and daughter. From kitchen disaster to family of three, a journey she never could have imagined when she'd frantically waved smoke away from that failed soufflé. Sometimes the most beautiful stories began with something going wrong, only to end up exactly right.